Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I know it's been quite a while since my last update. I think it was probably sometime in May, I don't know. It was sometime before this move, I know that much. And I just want to thank you all for the support here, on Instagram, on Facebook, personally. This move has been pretty tough because it's an all new place for me. My plants had to go through quite a bit of an arduous transport as I moved from Hyattsville, Maryland, very close to DC, to Las Vegas, Nevada here in the middle of the desert a couple of months ago, back in June here in 2022. The travel time was about 2.5 days maybe, and the plants were in a U-Haul hitch with no additional water and no additional sunlight from the time that we left. And I didn't thoroughly water them before we left because most of them were actually moist upon departure. My partner was bottom watering with the 5-cent solution so that he could share the water and make it very easy for him to do while I was here in Vegas the month prior, prepping for my job and getting adjusted to living here. So again, I didn't water my plants before the commute, which is something that I probably should have done, water and mist, upon my departure, because the temperatures traveling in the middle and through the country were at least 95 degrees Fahrenheit and above, and I didn't factor that. So by the time I got here, although I had left with about a little over 100 orchids, I had arrived with maybe 85 or 86 due to the heat stress, and later on I would go on to lose a few more because of the watering and lighting. And those two factors were because of the lack of and because of the excess, and I'll get into that in a few. So upon arrival into the apartment, as you can see here, I do have a grow light set up, but upon arrival, I did place most of the plants here in my balcony. Now, there's not a lot of light coming through here, which I thought would be a great idea. However, my balcony does face north, and the ultimate final results were that there just wasn't enough light coming through. So because there wasn't enough light coming through, the plants weren't growing. However, I kept true to my watering schedule of once a week because the temperatures were, above 75, 77. They're normally a range of 80, a roundabout range of 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And it just wasn't a success. As you can see, I have a couple of my houseplants here and on raised portions of my apartment as well as where you come in, but for the most part my collection has been moved. I do have a couple of orchids here on the balcony that fared well in the heat, but that is an anomaly here in Vegas, which I will get into in a few moments. So just coming on back to the grow space here, the next thing I wanted to touch on was the water. So when I first started my orchid journey about 2 years ago, I was really concerned about my water because everyone told me that, your ppm, your parts per million, which is the mineral concentration in the water, how they read it, parts per million. They tell you, if it's too high, it can affect your plants, it can affect the growing, and I never had a challenge with that, as the water in my DC location prior to here was about maybe 150 on average in the ppm, and I could actually use that on most of my collection. However, here in the middle of the desert, I don't have my ppm meter, but I will take a guess that it's extremely high, at least 250, 300 or above. Basically, it has to be somewhere around the double of what I was in DC. And the reason why I know that is because a lot of the plants that I lost, when the roots would rot or when the leaf would turn yellow, I would just simply rip it open. And I could literally see the mineral deposits on the insides of the plants, especially in the roots. It was really crazy. I mean, I knew that there was a bit of a mineral buildup in the pot because I could see everything building up in the pots, but I didn't know the minerals were going into the plants and essentially affecting, I guess, the process that they use to, I don't know, intake the water or take the nutrients out the water. And another factor to show you is I use the tap water in my humidifier. And if you look at my bird of paradise plant here, you can see all of the mineral deposits. I'm assuming probably calcium and fluoride, which is the highest concentration of minerals in tap water. This is the result. And I'm assuming that because I was watering with this water, it was going into the plant at speeds and at basically so rapidly that I couldn't really do anything to affect it aside from changing the water. So for the most part, my phals, the Phalaenopsis, as well as my houseplants, they are all receiving pure distilled water. And my paphs, the Paphiopedilums, my cute lady slippers, they receive a mix. I was giving them a tap water because they seem to like it. However, it does build up, the mineral content does build up in your pot, and you would have to flush more often. So I do dilute the water from my paphs, but for my phals, I have now switched to giving them pure distilled water, as well as the houseplants that I've now heavily invested into. And I do apologize, I don't have any photos when I was doing this stuff. Originally, my videos were all done with a ring light, and I would bring the plants in front of the ring light, but I did leave that ring light and I have yet to order a new one. So now that I'm doing this video, I know that I'm gonna have to order one so I don't have to hold the phone or hold my camera, whatever I'm using to record these videos. Now with the distilled water, I have noticed a very, very big difference. If you all do have houseplants, it's a very great and sure shot way to test your water. For example, my calatheas are very sensitive, and this is probably yellowing because it's an old leaf, but the brown edging around the tips has definitely happened because of my water. And houseplants will show you very quickly, very, very quickly, if the water you're using is too hard or maybe even soft. I've had to really learn about that. I don't have soft water or softeners in my water, but I did go on a research binge learning about water and did learn that there are some softeners, AKA salts, that are also present in some people's tap waters to reduce the hardness, but will have a detrimental effect to your plants, your houseplants, orchids, anything. And to be quite honest, it was an economical decision for me. Because I now pay for my power, my electricity, I thought it's better to have that as an addition to my expenses rather than the water. So I don't know if I'm gonna eventually invest in a RO system or maybe even a distiller machine to convert my tap water to distilled water. But my water is definitely something I'm looking to change or get a better habit, because right now I am buying distilled water from the grocery store, and although it's cheap, I know it will eventually add up, but I don't know if investing in an RO system is necessarily right for me. I mean, I do have 100 or so plants now, including the house plants, but I don't have hundreds, so I'm still equating these factors into my hobby. And you know, the next thing that I wanted to talk about was an example, which was my Schilleriana. My Schilleriana was one of my pride and joys, and sorry about that. We're over here cooking and the noises were a little louder than we both expected. So here we are talking about my Schilleriana. And this is one of my orchids that suffered the most, but also had quite a good bounce back. So I lost quite a few roots I also lost 3 whole leaves on this, but as you can see, I do have a leaf starting to grow, as well as 2 roots poking out. The roots here look a little bad, but they're doing well. And moving along over to the keiki, as you can see, the keiki has a leaf growing, which I'm very proud of. And the root that's growing did stop, but did restart. And you can see from the segment here, so there's a segment in the root that I can't zoom in on because I'm using one hand to film this, but that tiny line there is basically where the root had stopped growing, and it's now regrowing along with the leaf. So that's pretty exciting. So along with that, I thought I'd mention that for the most part, with regard to orchids, my phals are they're all completely repotted in sphagnum moss, which allows me to water them in tandem with my paths. So everything during the summer here is only watered once a week because I do allow for a drying time. I thought that the all sphagnum moss would result in me watering these guys a little later, but turns out it's so dry here regardless of my humidifier, and achieving almost 60% on a low setting. Regardless of that, my collection doesn't really respond to the humidity levels around here because they're just so drastically dry. So with the sphagnum moss setup, I can ensure that there's always humidity, not only around the plants, but just in my collection in general, because sphagnum moss holds so much water. And with the fans going and an additional humidifier and good temperature, I generally have a good amount of ambient humidity here, just in general, which is a blessing and really great. Now, with regard to the phals, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but the paths are still potted in the same mix. So they have, you know, the same amount of moss and bark. But what I did do, for some of the paths I did repot, I added what I call grit. So grit is sort of the bottom barrel of your bark mix. So where the bark is extremely small and things look like dirt, I basically added that when I repotted these. So a lot of these I wouldn't necessarily call a true repot, because what I did was take all the medium out and replace it with the same materials and just added way more smaller mixes in there with regard to the bark content. I wouldn't say I added soil in there because I don't think there's soil in bark mix, but some of the material seems so small that it almost seems like there's soil in some of the mixes, but it's not that. It's very fine bark and perlite and sphagnum moss, lava rock. There's all sorts of stuff in my mix because as I pot my plants, I mix everything together essentially and reuse everything that's still good. Now, moving along with regard to the humidity levels out here, as you can imagine, in the desert, it is pretty dry. So along the lines of what I mentioned before, with the humidifier running, I can achieve minimum levels of 60%, as high as 70, maybe 80 on a cloudy day. And without the humidifier, you're more around, you know, less than 40. It fluctuates, but without my humidifier, it's definitely less than 40. And this microclimate that I'm able to achieve is only possible in my Growspace. So as I mentioned earlier, let's go outside and see some of the plants that I have here on my balcony. So, excuse the bugs out here. So on my balcony I have a catasetum. I believe this is a Chuck Taylor that I did purchase from High Desert Orchids. located in Albuquerque, New Mexico, but they do ship all around the country, and you can see some clear signs of, you know, needing water. But the interesting thing about this plant is that when I put it out here, it just grew, and then it spiked, and then the new growth started growing even more. So, you know, I keep the bottom fairly moist. I probably put water in this baby about maybe every 3 days, every 4 days, just at the bottom, and the water seeps up to the top and keeps the entire plant moist the entire time. Because again, as you can see, I live in the clear desert where the humidity is pretty low, but this plant seems to survive in it, and I don't want to move it because it's doing so well, and it hasn't bloomed for me in 2 years. And look at that, 4 blooms with a new growth. I also have a Phalaenopsis pulcherrima out here. This was a Doritis pulcherrima. This is the variety Marmorata, which has the variegated foliage, and again, another plant that's doing great out here. And just on the lower shelves here, I do have some Brassocatlias. I really have to look up to see what these are, but they're doing great out here. Tons of new growth on both, and they haven't bloomed. But the other day, I did see something in here, so I think that's a bloom, but I'm not sure. But this hasn't bloomed before, so I hope it does. And this is, I have purchased as a seedling, so I think that has another year to grow before it's able to bloom. But the growth is insane out here in the desert. So some more houseplants here. Dracaena marginata, a palm plant, a ZZ plant, the Zenji version, which is sort of like a bonsai growing version of the ZZ plant, a golden pothos up there, orchid up here, some orchids, more Dracaena marginata, a snake plant, some calathea, which I'm just finding so confusing. I think this is like a Calathea Freddy, but another video for those. So moving back along to my orchids and the humidity levels here. You know, it's just something I don't know, I'm just learning a lot about, especially living in a place that offers a desert climate. So again, my 4 orchids that are out there are basically, in my eyes, thriving, because I've never seen them grow like that in my DC location. So I'm not gonna move them. I'm just gonna keep watering them the way I do, which is about every 2 days. But again, out here I just moved, and we've been having a lot of rain, like the most rain in like 6 years. So I actually get away with watering them every maybe like 4 or 5 days because of the humidity jump at night. Sorry, my AC, the central AC just turned on. But I do want to wrap up this video with a couple of tips that I've learned. And I just wanted to start at the moss with bark setup. So I've learned that with the tap water, it's going to show you very fast with white deposits inside of your pots that look like, I don't know, it looks like mold, but when you rub it, you can clearly see that it's some type of mineral deposit. Another thing that I've learned when you live somewhere with low humidity is to bottom water your plants. So as you can see, a lot of my plants have decorative pots around them. There are a rare few of them that are potted directly in decorative pots or the self-watering setups. But if you live in a low humidity environment, having a little water left at the bottom of your pot at the end of watering day is going to benefit you. I don't know how else to say that. But with regard to watering, the humidifier running all day is something that I definitely take advantage of. between natural hot air here and the fact that I have like a central AC unit running in my apartment, the AC unit here, I don't know if you can see, but the latch is all the way down as compared to this one that's up. Because I don't have the AC run here at all. My partner hates it, but I don't want any drafts here. So the ambient temperature is about, let's see, 77 now, but gets as low as 54 and as high as 95. And you can see my humidity gets as low as 14%. That's when the humidity runs out, when my humidifier goes out overnight basically, or when I'm at work. But it gets as high as 87. So that's a pretty good balance, even though the extremes are very high. It's a very good balance of humidity because the low doesn't stay low for long. The next thing I've learned is that you're gonna lose a few plants. Like for me, I lost a crap ton because of the heat, and I lost some because I couldn't get the watering scheduling right when I moved here. And it was mainly because I had moved to a north-facing apartment. So as you can see, here it looks pretty bright coming through because it's sunlight, it's always gonna be bright, but this is about the natural timbre of my entire apartment, this little section here, if I don't have lights on, because you can see I have a pretty bright light that's north facing, but it only looks bright because I have white walls. And another reason why I have slowed down on the decoration of this apartment was because I thought when I moved I was going to change my walls, but now that I have so many plants, I'm realizing I need light, and I can't do the things I thought I was going to do so often. Yeah. As you can see, of course, as my page suggests, I'm an orchid grower, but I've got into so many houseplants, and there are houseplants all around my house. I have some in my bathroom, which I don't want to go in right now because it's pretty messy. But along with messy, I do have my snake plant here, one of these sansevierias. Excuse me, I said along with messy, and I meant to say with how messy, you know, my sink and stuff is, but snake plant here, ponytail palm here, and just, you know, my houseplants and all the things that I love. This journey's pretty cool, and it was taking me some time to get back to recording YouTube videos because I didn't know how I was gonna approach this, but I thought, let me just pick up my camera and let everyone know that everything's actually going good regardless of the speed bumps I've had to bump over along the way. And one thing I want to point out is the fact that I do think my Hoya collection, there's Matilda here and there's a generic Hoya here, which I think is Carnosa. I think that's gonna grow because those plants look like they thrive in Hoya settings. Those plants look like they thrive in orchid settings, and orchids are totally my thing. Like I started this whole thing with orchids 2 years ago, and I do have a couple of house plants, but for the most part, as you can see, I'm an orchid guy, plant guy, whatever you want to call it. And on that note, I will leave you all with a big thank you. When I have my blooms growing again, I will return back to some care videos. And as you can see, you know, I have some paths blooming here. I do have a path back here that's blooming. You probably can't see it, but this path back here is blooming, and it's a Catherine Brios. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but I'll get into it when I do a spotlight video on plants that are blooming. But again, thank you all for tuning into this video. Sorry that my AC turned on during the filming of this, but I'm not gonna film it over because I've done this too many times again, and now it's gonna cut off. Great. But anyway, you can follow me on my Instagram as well as my Facebook. My name is The Right Path, TheRightPathPh. Path as in Paphiopedilums. My favorite orchids and probably plants thus far. See you guys in the next video, and thank you again for tuning in to this on the spot, impromptu, really not like my last video. See you in the next one. Toodles.